In this video, we're going to cover survey logic. The first thing to do is understand the differences between entrance, validation, and jump rules, and how start and end script integrate into all of that. We'll then cover the built-in functions, rotations and randomizations, expressions, functions, loop, differences in scripting models, and code libraries. But let's start with the logic engine. SurveyToGo has a logic engine that is composed out of entrance, validation, and jump rules. Before a question is displayed, the logic engine checks the engine rules and decides whether the question should be displayed or skipped. This is sometimes referenced as skipping rules. In SurveyToGo, it's called entrance rules. After the respondent fills out the question goes through a validation rule to check the validation of the data. If the data is not valid, a validation message is popped up. If the data is valid, the engine proceeds to process the jumping rules. Jumping rules are also referenced sometimes as branching rules and decide where the engine will jump after or branch after this question. In addition to the rules, there is also a place where the scripter can add some scripting code. These are referenced as scripts. A question has two types of scripts, start script and end script. Start script run right after the entrance rules and before the question is shown. If you want to do filtering or piping text, the start script will be the ideal place to put the code in. The other place where you can add scripting code is at the end script. The end script is run right after the validation process has been complete and right before the jump rules have been processed. So if you want to run calculations on the answers of the current questions and do something with those calculations, the end script will be the ideal place to put those code in. Let's see a demo of this scripting model and rules engine. I'm going to use the rules demo survey for this entire video. The first chapter is the overview chapter and has a dummy question that will allow us to understand the various parts of the rules engine and the scripting engine. Let's switch to that dummy question. What I have done is add a couple of prompts to let us understand better where all the rules get processed. So if we switch to the Rules tab, I've added a validation prompt, an entrance rule prompt, and prompts in the validation and prompts in the jump rules. I've also added prompts in the start script and end script. Don't worry if you don't understand this code. We're going to cover all of this later on. This is just to show you where the engine calls all these different parts. Let's run this in the emulator. For this demo, I'm going to use the PC preview emulator and not the mobile preview emulator. I'm going to run in the emulator and we'll click on Next. The first prompt that we see is the checking entrance rule prompt. As you can see, this is right before showing the next question. Then the start script runs. Then the question is displayed. If you want to run the validation checks, validation rules run. And then finally, after continuing the question, the end script runs, and then the branching code runs. SurveyToGo contains a lot of built-in functions that you can use in order to interact with the survey. To get a full reference and list of all the available functions, just head to our support site at support.dublo.net and just search for the Handbook. This will bring up the SurveyToGo built-in functions Handbook post. There you have a link to download the SurveyToGo commands manual. The manual contains the list of all of the functions available in SurveyToGo. Each function, for example, has a description of the function, the parameters, and an example. This is a great reference for finding out all of the different functions. Everything is also categorized into categories on the contents page, but usually you work with the index and search for your function. All of the scripting code that is shown you in the next videos of this series are all using functions that are listed here in this reference manual, so feel free to head to this manual and look up all the functions that are being used throughout the demo videos. SurveyToGo supports rotations and randomizations. The rotations and randomizations can be accessed through the Advanced tab right on the bottom where you have the randomization part. Randomization can be configured for both questions, chapters, answers, and loops. Another important tool in scripting a survey are expression questions. Expression questions are non-visible questions that allow you to run a piece of code that is run every time the engine reaches this expression question. So instead of showing that question to the respondent, the engine just runs the code that sits inside the answer of this question. Here is a sample expression question. As you can see, the question type is an expression. It has a name, and in the Answers tab, instead of answers, we have some code that adds up 10 and 12 and returns that number. Of course, you can write much more complicated code, but the general idea is that the engine will run this code when it reaches this expression question. So if you need to run some complex calculations or scripts, this is the ideal place to do it. Do not confuse expression questions with functions. We have a separate functions feature that you can use in order to write functions. Adding functions to a survey greatly simplifies scripting of that survey. If you have some complex part of script that you want to group into a function and use throughout a survey, this is where you can use the functions part. The functions library of a survey can be accessed through the Advanced tab and clicking on the Edit Advanced Scripts. This function library is shared across this entire survey, so you can access any function written here throughout the survey. You can always access the functions library also from each of the questions. Just click on a question, switch to the Scripts tab, and click on Advanced Scripts. It will open that same shared survey library of functions for you to edit. Here is a sample function, mySum, that takes in a question 1 and question 2 index and just sums up the answers of both of these questions and returns that sum. You can access this mySum function throughout the survey. While in previous videos we showed you how to configure a loop, it is important to know that loops also have logic components to them. To access the logic part of a loop, you select the looping chapter, click the Loops tab, and then put in the relevant code in the break rule, the start script of an iteration, the end script of an iteration, and if you need to, you can also click the Use Entrance rule and put in some code in the iteration entrance rule. All of these script components run at the start or end of each of the iterations of a loop. So in this example, we have a loop that runs 5 times, so each of these scripting components will run 5 times. Note that the randomization of iterations is also controlled through these checkboxes right here. When you create a survey, or at any point during the scripting, you can switch between Windows type scripting and Android type scripting. This is controlled through the Survey node. and clicking on the Advanced tab. Right on the bottom, you have the survey scripting style, Windows or Android. It is recommended to use the Android-based scripting style since this will involve using JavaScript, which is easier to master and extend. Moreover, surveys that are using the Android-based scripting style will run on both Windows Mobile, PC, that's Windows XP, Vista, or 7, or Android devices, whereas Windows-based scripting style will only run on a Windows Mobile device or a Windows XP, Vista, or 7 device. The Windows-based scripting style is mostly provided for backwards compatibility and is not recommended for new surveys. We also recommend to make sure that the strict Java validation script is turned on. This runs some extra JavaScript validation code to make sure that your syntax is correct. If you have a legacy survey that you wish to convert from Windows-based device to a JavaScript or Android-based scripting style, it is recommended that you head over to our support site, type Windows JavaScript in search, and read the how-to about converting surveys from Windows to Android. Finally, code libraries can be used to share scripting code throughout surveys. While the functions mechanism is a shared functions library of a survey, the organization code library allows you to write functions that will be accessible from all surveys. The organization code library can be accessed from the studio on the bottom in the Libraries node. Expand it and then either enter the organization's Android-based scripting library or the Windows-based scripting library. Let's open up the Android organization scripting library. Every function that you write here will be accessible from all the surveys in your organization. There's also a global script function library, which is maintained by Dublo and contains some specially written functions that you can view and use. Feel free to browse through the global script functions library and its implementation, as you can generate many ideas of how to implement your functions from these functions. In this video, I gave you an introduction to the SurveyToGo's logic, engine, and features.